everybody. Welcome back once again to your weekly dose of songs of ice and fire from myself and Pat McAdams. It was both when the Eagles played the Packers last night. How you doing, Pat?
I'm doing great. So far, I've not been indicted in any tipping off of pitches for baseball, so I would say I'm doing better than
Nice.
others.
Awesome. And we do have some listener feedback at the end of the episode, but just to briefly ask, did you get any constructive feedback about your gambling habit from from last episode?
I don't think my wife Brittany listened to that episode. I think
Okay.
I told her it was like a malfunction and like she should just pass this one up because it
Yeah.
doesn't sound very good. So
Totally. So to be more specific, Brittany, if you have constructive thoughts about Pat's multi-million-dollar gambling, you can email in to anotherwithjim@gmail.com and we'll get to the bottom of it. So, Pat, we should take that to mean that you're good to go and you should wager a lot more than you're wagering if there hasn't been critical feedback. So
yeah, I think
let's make sure
I
that we interpret this.
that's right.
Cool.
Licensed to rock and roll.
Speaking of which, we are getting started with our word, world, and wild card once again. We will not forget the wild card, but we start with the world. So Pat wanted to go back to something that I said towards the end of the sermon, which I think makes sense to be at the end of the sermon. I should apologize to people on our feed. We did have some audio problems for the first part of the sermon recording from this past Sunday, so we'll get it fixed for next time. I think you missed at least my introduction, and I remember as I was preaching the sermon, I think this is maybe the best sermon introduction that I have ever preached, but it's gone forever. So,
I also was at home, so I didn't hear that either.
oh man. Pat, don't try to reconstruct it. I will not tell you anything more about it, but it was amazing. People
I'll
were
take you.
laughing, people were crying, they were rolling in the aisles.
I'll take your word for it.
Actually, we are going to get started on word just a second. One in the original Post Sunday Blues format, was it the Guitar Slim Pickens, the last section of Odds and Ends? There was a mouse in the sanctuary that was scurrying around during the service this past Sunday. So it's an old church building. And it was distracting enough to me that I had to decide not to be distracted by it because I saw it. And my fear, Pat, was if that mouse would start running under the pews, it would be like a rom-com or something
Yeah.
when pew by pew people are starting to scream and lose their minds. So
Were you like
it,
seemingly
it
the only person who saw it?
I did get a text from somebody else sitting towards the front during the service, also letting me know about the mouse. So yeah,
Okay.
multiple people did. And yeah, it's just another Sunday. It's
Hmm.
what we do. Uh, but that's the whole story. There is nothing more. The Going back to the sermon from the part that is extant on audio is thinking about how we can actually grow as better witnesses to Jesus. So John the Baptist from the Synoptic Gospels can be called, Pat, in John's Gospel, John the Witness, because there's so much more of a singular focus on John the Baptist, who does less baptizing, but more pointing to Jesus, pointing to Jesus, pointing to Jesus, more witnessing. And yeah, in John chapter 3, John the Baptist slash John the Witness says about Jesus, he must become greater, I must become less, which is pretty much all John the Baptist does over and over again, which has always been an interesting focus to me, including I think for most of us, we're not baptizers. So in the synoptics, there is less for us to model and emulate when it comes to John the Baptist, but there is a lot for us to model and emulate when it comes to John the Witness. And John clearly is a model for this. My experience, Pat, with evangelism, Christian witness over the years is that most Christians understand that they should do it, and many Christians don't do it and feel guilty about it. So I tried to get a little more practical with, yeah, let's try to do better about something that we don't need it doesn't blow our mind to hear that we should be witnesses for Jesus, but still sometimes the needle doesn't move a whole lot in terms of making progress with it. So I have a couple more specific thoughts, but any bigger picture takes on Christian witness one way or another?
Ha has there been like a groundswell of support for renaming John the Baptist to John the Witness? Um, I just it is interesting.
No.
I wonder.
I'll answer that for you, but no. Go ahead.
Yeah, like practically like thinking about John the Baptist as John the Witness does kind of kind of take you in a different place. But that aside, um, yeah, I kind of thought about like what do we need to do to be a better witness? It's just like we need to be a better witness, like
Yeah.
kind of like you have to do the work. But I did like how you said, or kind of like you don't have to kind of w knock door to door,
Hmm.
spreading Christ's word. Although I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah.
I think people should probably do more of that, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, but like, there's also other ways you can witness, again, and that's kind of what you're getting at. But yeah, so I like that's kind of for people who may, um, I'm not sure, like be afraid or not know how to do like kind of face to face, like evangelizing or just like actually like
Hmm.
witnessing. Um, I think that's like a good starter pack. Um,
Yeah.
or it can maybe be the whole game for people. I don't know how that all kind of shakes out, or whether that kind of lead into like, or give you like a foot in the door. But
Right.
I thought that was a good way to think about, some of the ways you can kind of get into that.
Yeah, I think it's both. I think there's a fearfulness piece, but then also a lack of equipping piece to it. And I tried to get at both of those a little bit. Speaking of John the Witness nicknames, that reminds me of what would be a good nickname for former Sixers player Ben Simmons. How about Ben the Witness Protector?
It's pretty good. And Jim, I've lost you right now temporarily. We will mid podcast try to try to write the
Oh,
and we're back on board now. I think we're good.
okay. Well, I will keep going and we'll see if we edit that in post versus not. Did you catch my Ben Simmons joke?
I did, yeah, and I affirmed it. I affirmed it.
Okay,
Said it was good.
nice. Okay. Well, if the podcast ends there, my work is done.
There we go.
And the as far as three specific rewire, the idea is, are there some specific small steps that we can take that will have a cumulative effect of pushing us forward and being witnesses and evangelists for Jesus? And none of these things super specifically relate to witness, but I think they're conducive to it. And the idea is, how do we put ourselves better in cycles of grace where if we're calling out to the Spirit for help and strength in multiple areas in our lives in a deeper way, this is going to affect how we actually witness to other people, uh, including directly sometimes. So the three pivots, and this is building on the three default witness postures that I mentioned back in September: consumerism, grievance, and wellness. Let's not stay there. And if for Christians and non-Christians, too often, if people would look at our lives from the outside, what are we witnessing to? Well, we want to buy a lot of stuff and desire to accumulate a lot of stuff. We are people of great grievance in 2025, and we're obsessed with our own wellness. But what if we rewire those things in three specific directions? And I talked about shifting from consumerism to generosity, grievance to peaceful engagement, and wellness to repentance. So, consumerism to generosity, it's easy for us to receive than to give. Jesus commands the opposite and models that in his gospel. And we need to call out for the Spirit's help to help us to be more generous people. And as we're living in generosity, remembering what God has done for us, then that creates more of a downhill trajectory, more momentum for witnessing more if we're living out generosity. And what do you know, Pat? Christmas is coming up. It was pretty definitive. Maybe it's been like this every year over the past few years, but on November 1st, after Halloween, the Christmas commercials, I tend not to watch a lot of network TV, at least first run on networks, but commercials during sporting events starting November 1st, we were hammered by Christmas commercials for buying. Uh, Generosity, grievance to peaceful engagement. And I tried to qualify and say there are things that people can and should be upset about and experience righteous anger in different ways as it relates to this cultural moment. So I don't want to eliminate that. It's more the preponderance of whining, especially in online communities, as opposed to doing anything. So what if we put less energy into performative grievance and instead peaceful engagement as far as showing up? And then wellness to repentance, which in some ways is was the most interesting of the three for me to think about. I actually said this earlier in the service too. I was pinch hitting as liturgist, and my introduction to the confession of sin is that there is no wellness without repentance. In the biblical mindset, we and wellness, wholeness, there's this Hebrew word shalom that talks about peace under God by God's grace and strength in every sphere, inside, outside. Because of our sin, if we only pursue wellness without a sense of, hey, there are some parts of me that are out of whack, disobedient to God, selfish, and turning away from others, then whatever wellness I construct is going to be ignoring sort of the cavity in the mouth sort of thing. So should we scorn our own sense of well-being? No, but we need to build in repentance as an aspect of that. And thinking if we're living in those cycles, hey, we're going to be more mindful of Jesus, more conscious of his good necessary work in our lives, and easier just to pull back the curtain to other people and say, look at what Jesus is doing. So I have one other big picture thought, but do you have any consumerism to generosity, grievance to peaceful engagement, wellness to repentance thoughts, Pat?
Yeah, so the performative grievance is it's so satisfying. It is like fast food in the moment.
Hmm.
It as someone who was like stuck in that prison, I would say maybe like a decade ago,
Hmm.
there was definitely a lot of that. And like that's not to say that I wasn't, for whatever social media platform, like I don't think that I was doing it just to do that, but it did feel good to kind of scream into the void and like be holier than thou, whether it's this issue or that issue.
Yeah.
I've since atoned for my sins, and I don't do that anymore. But it pops up every once in a while. I was like, man, it would be really satisfying, and like that would feel good to like one up somebody or one up a group or something like that online. So
Yeah.
so it is there. Like that satisfaction is real, and I think once you get in that cycle, it can be really hard to get out of that. Just like cutting out sugar for the first couple weeks or month, it's going to feel terrible. And then,
Hmm.
maybe a couple months later, you might not even really look back on it too much. But until then, yeah, it can be gnarly. Um, and then, yeah,
Hmm.
and then I wonder like the prerequisite or like two other quick thoughts.
Hmm.
If you're kind of, want to be kind of, like known by your actions or, let your actions kind of like do the talking as far as different things. It is interesting, like
Hmm.
as we are more alone these days, um, you're around less people, you're doing things with less people, you're shopping with less people, you're, going to the gym with less people. So it is interesting how like,
Yeah.
um, for some people, I wonder like what you're doing and how you're acting and how other people are seeing that or how that's kind of woven in there. It gets interesting as well if like the lack of that. Um, and then the last thing, like I wonder if it is like a prerequisite, not that, God can't work his will on his own,
Hmm.
but kind of like fixing your home before you kind of go out and start, evangelizing or that type of thing. I wonder in some ways,
Yeah.
if you kind of, need to kind of take care of yourself. Um, I'm not sure evangelizing the word to someone and having these habits and having this thing and people know you for this and see the fruit of your spirit in XYZ ways would kind of like align with you kind of like tell them like, by the way, I'm a Christian, you should come to church and like, oh, wait, I know you. You're a Christian. Like,
Hmm.
so I think that
Yeah.
is interesting. So that's just a few thoughts that I had.
Yeah, and that relates to grievance as well and
Yeah,
performative grievance. The
sure.
I'm Pat, I'm going to be flying soon to North Carolina to be the speaker at Eric Mitchell, our former executive pastor, his men's retreat, unless I have to be my own air traffic controller this weekend. But the analogy that comes to mind is I forget if they still do it, but at least in the old days when oxygen masks would drop from the ceilings of planes, the standard PSA there is, hey, put your own mask on before
Yeah.
helping somebody else. And that's a both and, that's not an either or. So we're never going to be perfect and completely sanctified. So we shouldn't wait until we're perfected before we start telling other people.
Yeah.
But we should be in our own process of gospel, faith, and repentance in a healthy way throughout the process of telling other people about Jesus too.
Yeah.
And people can smell a fake for all of the downsides of life in 2025. We are better than we ever have been at smelling a phony. And and people can you can sniff it out. So yeah, all that's good stuff. My big picture thought, Pat, here's a concept and a phrase that I've been workshopping. It might actually, as we Pat, you and I continue to talk about things like I'm not gonna spoil a new website coming down the road, but I wonder if this language would make it in here, or I'm going to talk about it on consistory in different ways. Uh, Try this phrase on for size. Christians are called to be, and I think this really fits Liberty Collingswood and what could be our mission in the current season. We are called to be a counterculture for the common good. And I think both pieces are important. We're called to be a counterculture, and that doesn't mean that we do everything the same way that everybody else around us is doing. In some ways, what's the point of being a Christian if there's no distinctiveness that comes with following a crucified Lord? But then we're a counterculture not only for our own or for people with whom we have an affinity by way of that or aspects of counterculture, I guess, but we're for the common good. So for people not only inside of our tribe, but outside of our tribe. And I think, including with these rhythms, people that are generous, people that are peacefully engaged, and people that are repentant, those are unusual things in a lot of ways. And that could help us along towards being a counterculture for the common good. How do you like it? What do you think?
I think it's terrible. I think all the hours that you spend. No, no, I think that sounds good. And I'm sure we'll hear more about it, but I like it.
Okay, so we have one satisfied customer so far. That's all I have for Word. Do you want to go into World?
Yeah, let's do it. Um,
Okay, so the standard disclaimer is that we're speaking more or less off the cuff with just a little bit of pre-cogitation involved. And that means for the benefit of hearing a couple of people talk about things that we're not sometimes completely sure about, we need to ask you for grace as we try to think through biblically aspects of our world in real time the best that we can. So that's the disclaimer is getting shorter. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, Pat, but that's what I have for this week. What's our topic?
so I say the question I have for you is
Yes.
when and why did society as a whole become okay with so much sex, violence, profanity in
Hmm.
kind of every area of culture or mass media consumerism?
Yeah.
Um, and is the cat out of the bag? And then is some of this okay? Is there,
Hmm.
and I'm sure like the sex violence, profanity, there's probably different levels of, how, um, like evil or pernicious some of those could be.
Yeah.
But are there kind of arguments for like a low level of that in any way broken down? So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Love it. So, Pat, I appreciate the thought that you put into these topics, and this is a fun one. So I have a couple of philosophers and cultural critics for you that will try to make a way forward. So with an increase in, let's call it vulgarity for a catch-all
Sure.
phrase, in the public sphere and media, and I'm keeping in mind a good bit of TV shows, movies, music, art for, but not only these things. Uh, Hegel, the I'm blanking out on his first name. What was Hegel's
It's
first
not
name?
Frederick. No.
Is it? Yeah, no, I think it was. That's so embarrassing. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel.
Okay,
Oh my
I
goodness.
got one of his
You
names.
got it right. Wow. Okay. Good job by you. Bad job by me. So, late 1700s, early 1800s, German idealist philosopher, whose philosophy I don't subscribe to, but at the same time, he was the guy that talked about the thesis, antithesis, synthesis, march of history and progress through time. And I think I do like the descriptive force of that, not prescriptive. It doesn't relate. I don't think it needs to relate to his whole system. So I think as vulgarity's been on the rise, or the pendulums that we'll talk about swinging back and forth is a version of that maybe. So you can go from Victorian England to the free love of the 1960s to today. And if Victorianism, for our purposes, is the original thesis, where there is very little public vulgarity of any kind, then in that 20th century US, the 1950s, even though you have the rise of teen culture and rock and roll, there's still very much a button down, surface level. Everything is very normalized. 1960s just blows all of that up. Among other things, you have uh, revolution of sexual ethics, but not only that. And so that's the antithesis, where you have people in the 1960s, college students, et cetera, rebelling against so much of what was considered good and normal in culture. And that was the antithesis. So you have and I think even though this wasn't necessarily the express purpose, although sometimes it was, uh, the 1960s counterculture was more vulgar, according to common uses of the word. So there was more sex, outward violence, profanity in all of those movements. And then today we just have sort of a synthesis of we have roots in conventional morality, Victorianism. We've been through the 1960s, and then we're sort of in some combination of these things today. We'll come back to that. Another person to mention, Philip Reif, was at University of Pennsylvania. He may have died 10 or 15 years ago. I don't think he was a Christian. He's one of those band behind the bands people, sociologist, like I said, cultural critic, who is referenced by a lot of both Christian thinkers that I listen to and read, and then also non-Christian thinkers also. But he would do different sorts of cultural analysis. And from his analysis, I actually need to go back and read him because he's been mentioned so many times, but it's getting to the point where I've got to read this guy myself. Uh, Talking about how we live in a post-Christian world, which is not itself a novel idea stemming from him, but here in the late modern West, the post-Christian world in which we live is very different from the pre-Christian world that existed in Europe and the old world beforehand. And one of the implications there is the post-Christian world that we live represents in part a turn back to paganism
Hmm.
with but that includes antibodies gained from having been a Christian world, quote unquote, for so long.
Interesting. Okay.
And so in some ways it's a return to pre-Christian stuff, but then also it's mixed in with, yeah, we've done the Christian thing with Christian morality and all of that. And so I think the media landscape with a lot of vulgarity fits this postmodern paganism stuff too in different ways. And so big picture, those are that's sort of where I think a couple ways to explain where we are. And I have a couple of caveats, but yeah, thoughts so far, big picture, Friedrich Hegel, Philip Reef,
I
Pat
like
McAdams.
yeah, I like Reef a lot. You know, that's
Oh,
interesting. That's an interesting thought. No, no, no. I
wait,
mean,
wait, have you read
no,
him?
no. But just kind of your
Okay,
frame and kind of like
gotcha.
his like thesis, how like it is kind of a return to our roots, but yeah,
Yep.
we have this kind of like some mechanisms built in to kind of like fight it, which maybe it doesn't fight as much as like distort it.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
that's no, I think that's interesting. Um, yeah, the one thing that kind of struck me is like, this is like a random aside, but when people like are on a podcast are talking about like a slasher movie, like the best kills, like the best murder
Hmm.
scenes,
Right.
and like I like horror movies, but I'm thinking like, that's a bit strange that like, you're watching movies like, what are the best kills? What are the best murders in these movies? Like, I get it's kind of playful, but is it like that's I don't know,
Hmm.
something about it kind of just like seems wrong.
Well, I think an ingredient there over the past 20, 30 years, there is an entertainment industry that maybe 15 years ago, maybe 20 surpassed movies in terms of overall gross, and that's video games. So you have the rise of video games as I think another factor as far as the increase of violence. But a couple of qualifications. I have two, I guess. Number one, I think it's fair to lump sex, violence, profanity all together, but it's actually a little bit, they're not the same as far as what's represented. So I think, and I think I've seen statistics about this, graphic violence in media has skyrocketed up, but as far as movies, TV shows, at least, sex, nudity, and profanity has decreased pretty dramatically since the 70s and 80s. And Pat, we've joked before off mic, the a PG movie in the 1970s
Yeah,
and 1980s shows so with parents of young kids, I've been there, Pat, you are there. Go back and show some classics from the 70s and 80s to your own kids that are PG. You got some explaining to do, not just with changing paradigms of what sorts of joke, comedy, conventions, and what's considered good taste, bad taste. There's just a lot more cursing, a lot more nudity,
yeah,
and so those things have pretty radically decreased. Why? I think so. It's probably more nuanced to say some of these things are rising, some are falling. These dials based on mores changing, and I think for less sex and nudity, at least as I read things in movies and TV, I think it's at least in large part, I think it is in large part an equity concern where if for so many years uh, the narrative goes women have been exploited in a ton of different ways, and if traditionally in movies and TV shows, uh, magazines, print, the nudity and sex has been from the male perspective onto women. We see that as wrong in this cultural moment, and then so we just need to decrease that. And I that makes sense to me.
yeah,
And so I think there is an equity concern specifically related to the lack of sex and nudity as it relates to upholding women in a different way. So you have some things falling, some things rising all at once. But my second qualification, then I'll turn it back over to you, is it's not the whole story, it's just that equity concern in itself, at least as I see things, because you also have an explosion of pornography. Not that pornography wasn't around in 60s, 70s, 80s, but it's proliferated with as technology has expanded. And so you you have on one hand this high road equity concern. This is why we're not showing as much sex and nudity.
yeah,
But there is just a more down and dirty reason that, well, we know that you can find other ways to get all of this stuff, so we don't need to burden our shows with that. So The low road is that there's a tacit admission that everybody's totally into this stuff anyway, and so what can look like equity and justice on the surface just puts into the very privatized category of whatever you do on your own time is totally okay. So it's this weird morality plus relativism swirling all around. And the couple things that last thing I'll say, then I'll turn it back over to you, Pat. The In some ways, the argument can be made that public morality as it relates to movies, TV, media, comedy is just as conservative as it ever was, but what we turn up and turn down changes. So the it's not the case if a non-Christian comes to me and said, "Well, Christians were so incredibly buttoned down and against a ton of stuff happening. They were always trying to whack-a-mole things away. We don't do that anymore." I would sort of say, we're still trying to tamp a lot of things down, some for the better, some for the worse. And there's always going to be a contemporary quote unquote Puritanism one way or another, but we just sort of change what we think we should be puritanical about. And other types of violence have gone down too. And I think for good, I'm not saying that this is bad, but it is interesting. So, violence against women in movies and TV shows, far less.
Yeah.
Not only that, violence against animals of any kind. Pat, Pat, we live in a post-Michael Vick world, and the so you know guys could be brutalized, but if Fifi takes a stray shot, then that's totally horrible. And then for science fiction, violence against droids is continually decried by certain aspects of culture. And there's always unintended consequences. I do wonder, not that I'm for any of these things. I mean, I care less about droids, but I'm certainly not for violence against women, uh, cruelties to animals. But I do wonder, and there's tons of pros and cons to stand-up I don't want to get into stand-up comedy
Yeah.
conventions and all that stuff, but there are voices, including on the political left, that fear that we're limiting so many sorts of dialogue that we're not actually caring for people in the ways that we think that we are, because we could simply be increasing fragility where if there are things that happen in the real world, uh, should art and culture and entertainment shield us from all of that, which gets, and I do have a couple of thoughts about, are some of the ugly things okay for us to see? I have some thoughts there, but I'll I'll take a breath and shut up. So yeah, any thoughts there?
Yeah, I
Hit
mean,
me.
yeah, a common refrain I'll hear from whether it be like from with like friends or something like in a movie like they better not kill that dog. Um,
Yeah,
like I think some people if they knew an animal would be killed in a movie, specifically like a dog or a cat maybe, they probably
yeah,
would not watch the whole movie at all. Like that would be a complete turn off for them. So I do find that
yeah,
interesting. Um,
right.
and then yeah, I guess the more I think about it, the devil is in the details where like you might see the front line, the headline, less gratuitous nudity and sex and TV and
Hmm.
everything. And then you say, oh, well, it's because people don't need it anymore. They're getting it somewhere else. So you could
Yeah,
see how the headline's one thing and then the details are a bit something else. Yes, that's kind of what I had there. So I'm interested on your
yeah,
thoughts as far as like is any of this like permissible? And again, sex, violence, profanity, I think there's different levels of, how destructive they can be personally, but maybe
yeah.
some people have different levels for each of those things that are different to what I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's one single answer there. The But to approach it from a couple of different directions. The And I've mentioned on podcasts through the years, there's a little book on art from Phil Ryken, former pastor at 10th Pres, now president of Wheaton University, Art for God's Sake. And Phil Ryken in that book makes the argument that we need ugliness in art, or else art will cease to have any connection with the world that we actually live in. And he has in mind, he's sort of poking Christians a little bit, where if at least stereotypically Christians, and who knows if this is a true stereotype or not, are against contemporary art, only want Hallmark movies all the time with nothing uncomfortable ever shown. Thomas Kincaid, Painter of Light sort of stuff. Uh, because we live in a fallen world, our art and culture making needs to take the fall into an account in in what we make. And Reichen turns around and says, I would criticize a lot of contemporary artistic movements that go too far in the other direction and say that, and he says there's a ton of fall, but not enough creation and redemption in what you do. So it's just pure ugliness for the sake of ugliness. I wouldn't advocate for that, but I think measured ugliness makes sense for art in different ways because we are living in a fallen world. And I'll tell what should we watch, what shouldn't we watch for a Christian is a valid conversation for sure. But even I think no matter where we draw some of those lines for ourselves and for our family, just because we watch a movie, just because I read a book, doesn't mean that I endorse every behavior of every character in that movie or in that book, which to me should just be common sense because most stories have bad guys and bad guys. So the alternative is we read stories with no bad guys. We pursue art with no conflict or drama. So yeah, we need some of it, and then also just pay attention to its fruit. So if I'm consuming media in such a way that does include ugliness and sin, but if it's causing me to become more ugly and sin more, then I should stop. So the these verses can be pushed to these verses need kept in balance with a lot of other stuff that Jesus says, but Jesus says it's not what goes into a man that goes into a man that makes him unclean. It's what comes out of what comes out of him, what comes out of his mouth, what comes out of his heart that makes him unclean. So if it tends to your sanctification, that's great. If it doesn't, you should probably be more wary and maybe consume less of it or cut it off.
Yeah, no, I think that's good, and I think also, if there's a movie or whatever kind of like something you want to watch, like, you should just make sure like that's not the reason you want to watch it is because of those things in it.
That's also good. Yeah.
If they're kind of like incidental, like for Goodfellas, the profanity is just,
Hmm.
you know, uh, it's classic how much profanity is, but it's a great movie,
Hmm.
and I don't think the profanity, makes or break it. But so I think, that's something that's like a masterpiece film.
Hmm.
And like, does it have to have all that profanity in it? Probably not, but I don't think anyone watches that movie just to hear someone scream the F word like 400 times, in my opinion,
Yeah.
anyway. Um, I think the other tricky thing is that this might be a whole other podcast topic. There's not a lot of good Christian art, in my opinion, in like
Hmm.
movies, TV. There is some music. There's some like, some books, but
Yeah.
I can't. Yeah, the Christian movies that are out there aren't going to be on AFI's like top 10 list. Although Terrence
Sure.
Malick, Tree of Life, I would say is a Christian movie. He is a Christian, so that might be
Hmm.
one of the few exceptions. But it can be tough to kind of find some good Christian art, and maybe Christians need to do a better job on making better things as well.
I think that's fair. And you're right, this is a podcast for another day, but that relates to the classic question that Christians have asked for a couple generations now. What's the difference between Christians who make art versus Christian art? And should we be more one than the other? So that's worth talking about. So Pat, yeah, that's all I have for World. And I we are videoing from my office, and I'm realizing that, hey, with daylight savings, I'm literally losing daylight right
It is
now.
getting a little
So
darker.
I'm becoming more, for those of you, thanks, by the way, for those of you that have been tuning in on YouTube. That's been fun to have that platform too.
Indeed.
But yeah, I'm going from Anakin to Darth as we speak. Wow. Oh, can I give two bits of listener feedback, and then we'll
Yes.
work that into wildcard?
Yep. Let's do it.
The a good friend of mine, Matt, who's been listening, corrected me when in a podcast, I forget when, he said, "Jim, you got a Star Wars fact wrong," and I by
Oh.
mentioning Anakin and Darth. So I made the joke that nobody has been conceived immaculately besides Jesus and Luke Skywalker. But Matt said, Jim, it was Anakin that had
Oh.
the Immaculate Conception, not Luke.
That
And honestly,
that got past me as well. That guy.
yeah, that's Shmi Skywalker in episode one telling Qui-Gon when Qui-Gon asks who's the dad, she's like, there is no
Yeah.
father. So
Yeah.
that's a bad job by me. And then
Okay.
also, Pat, I should have mentioned this last week, but I forgot. And I hope he's listening again. When for Halloween 2 Fridays ago, Emily was out passing out candy to kids, and she told me at the end of it, "Hey, there was somebody came up to me, or just one of the parents. Kids come up, and there's small talk with parents.
Yeah.
She said, Jim, there was a guy that I didn't recognize that came to my door and said, 'Hey, does a pastor live here?' And Emily was like, yeah." And then the guy said, "Does he have a podcast?" And she said, "Yes." And he says, "Is it another thing with Jim? I listen to that all the time."
Wow. That's very
Right.
interesting. That's
And and now and Emily didn't recognize him. That doesn't mean that he hasn't been to Liberty Collingswood before, but I
sure.
think Emily is there most Sundays and recognize most people. So, buddy, who talked to Emily, thanks so much for speaking up. You made my decade. Sorry if Emily didn't recognize you and you've been to Liberty Collingswood, but either way, this is awesome. And I was in charge of dinner that night. Normally, the dance that Emily do is that she's in charge of producing dinner. I'm in charge of cleaning dinner.
Hmm.
Whatever that means, by and large,
Yeah.
most nights. I was in charge of dinner that night, but after I heard that, hey, this guy said, "Hey, is this where the star of another thing with Jim lives?" It's kind of like, should I be in charge of dinner? Shouldn't we like have a person that does that at this
Yeah.
point? I don't think I need to. This is not for a podcast star to do. And she did not laugh.
No, I
That's
think
the whole
well,
story.
I think you're on the verge of a breakout. Yeah. You don't have an agent or an attorney, you need to get one now.
You're my olive. So there's
Yeah.
Pat Legal, there's
Oh,
Pat Agent.
oh boy.
So yeah, that's great. It's gonna be awesome. Okay, what's the wild card, my friend?
So the wild card is just your thoughts on how hard was it to launch a church plant and
Oh,
being kind of like the lead pastor, the main person. Did you put
hmm.
just insane amount of like pressure on yourself? And are you kind of glad you're not back there? And or what do you kind of miss about the excitement of like kind of getting started there? So just a couple minutes and I need thoughts of that
Oh,
in that
yeah.
area.
That's a thoughtful question, Pat. Thanks for asking. So at the end of September, I was at the 1 year anniversary of Liberty Bristol, which is or it is the newest church in the Liberty Communion. It planted in September of 2024. I'm the coach of that Kyle Connect, that church planter. He's preached at Liberty a couple of
Mhm.
times.
Yeah.
And so I've been doing monthly coaching calls plus other things as needed for years with Kyle, both pre-launch and since he's launched. And I had good flashbacks when I was at the 1 year anniversary service when Kyle and other people were telling stories related to the first year. And I told Kyle this myself, including after that worship service. I do have some jealousy that in the early days of church planting, everything is moving super fast,
Hmm.
and God is continuing to work at Liberty Collingswood. We're going to be baptizing an adult, Pat, three Sundays from now, just somebody professing faith in Jesus. Like God is still doing miraculous things in our midst. There is something about an early church plant where there's more heartbreak, but there's also more God just shows up and does something amazing. And Kyle and his team, some of which they shared at that anniversary service, are experiencing that spin cycle of, and there's just a vitality to how Bristol are sacrificing a ton of time, energy, money for the kingdom of God. And so I'm jealous and I miss that vitality of the early days of a church plant. And at the same time, it's a little bit like a grandparent and I don't have grandchildren. The I I I've heard from grandparents it's great to just play with grandkids and think they're awesome, but I don't necessarily wish that I was a parent again. So that's kind of how I feel
Yeah.
with 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 church plants at this point. One joke about my age, when I was in my 20s, I saw this great hat at a store that said number one granddad. And I really wanted to buy it because I thought, hey, I'm like 23 years old. Wouldn't it be funny for me to have a hat, baseball cap that says number one granddad? Emily shot that down and said, I don't know who you're making fun of, or it's not funny. It's just weird. At some point, I crossed over the threshold where, at least today, I could wear that hat and people would come up and congratulate me and say, hey, kid, congratulations, you're a grandpa. So yeah, I miss the pace, but then also, and this is something that I do coach planters about. To get a church off the ground, you need to operate for a period of time at an unsustainable pace. And all aspects of that are important. Late modern West, you gotta run fast and work hard, or it's not going to work.
Yeah.
So it is unsustainable, but it's only for a season. And one of the ways that church planters flame out is that, and I've the in the mid this is part of connected with when I took my original sabbatical. I had some trouble myself 2016, 17, 18 downshifting where I didn't need to work that fast anymore, but I was just used to the adrenaline
Yeah.
cycle that there were unhealthy patterns that were starting that I needed to just step back and say I need to rewire right now. So I I don't think I would ever I'm happy to coach church plants. I don't think I would ever want to plant another church, but who knows what God has in store. But yeah, that's a great question. I'm in my and I've planted in Texas, planted here. Uh Two seems like a good number
Yeah.
for 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 this guy. But yeah, I appreciate the question.
Yeah. And one follow up, did you reach a point ever or have a moment or a week or a month where you're like, I think the church is going to make it? Did you have any like breakthrough or was it just way too gradual? There we go. All right.
Like turn on that
Very
light
intimate now.
for the breakthrough.
Um,
Wow.
yeah. Well, yeah. So was there like a year, a month, week, or a moment that was like, all right, I think I can take a breath now because I think we're gonna be okay. Or are you still
Great
taking a
question.
breath now?
That's tomorrow. The what I've thought it's a great question. I've thought about this question for for church plants that grow and are healthy, like ours has been, and I'm really grateful for that. I was told later that I fell into the typical pattern where it's hard to know exactly where that line of sustainability falls in real time, which means that for most planters with healthy growing churches that become sustainable and have sustained vitality, we take that deep breath too late,
Mm,
where that deep breath comes not the day that planters realize, hey, this is going to make it. And there's a lot that I should relax for and give thanks to God for. Usually the realization, and this is true of me, I realized I should have begun to take these deep breaths a year or two ago.
Hmm.
And I was more stressed and anxious than I needed to be. So sort of like when you have young kids where
Yeah.
you're you'll miss the days a lot more even though you're stressed in the and when do you stop being a parent of young kids? Nobody knows. You never stop being a parent, but there's more for us to savor and relax into in God's goodness than we tend to do.
All right, sounds good. Well, I'll pull some of these quotes for the future oral history of Liberty Church Collingwood planting.
I
Should
like it.
be good information here. So cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Pat. Thanks everybody for the feedback. Thanks to Halloween guy. Talk to everybody again.